Hello everyone and welcome to the next class and session about the 1E45 repertoire. So in this video I'm going to look at some of my games in the Scotch Gambit. So Scotch Gambit happens after d4 takes bishop c4, knight f6, and okay, here white has different options. In castle, play e5, those are the main moves, and there is after castle, knight takes e4. So before entering the main lines, there is the so-called Nachmanson Gambit, which is knight c3. It's a very funny looking move, putting the knight on pre, and yeah, basically, in case of DC, white has different, so to say, dangerous tries. Like I believe starts with bishop f7 and then queen d5 and such lines. So it can get really messy. But black has a very easy solution. So I took on c3, bc, and bishop e7. So basically, black is already up a pawn. If it's possible to finish the development just with one extra pawn, it should be enough without entering any adventures. My opponent played cd, I played d5, and he went bishop d3. I mean, here I guess bishop b5 is somewhat more critical, but it's also analyzed in the course and it doesn't really lead anywhere for white. So yeah, my opponent just played bishop d3, castle c3, I played rook e8, h3, h6. I mean, not so much is happening. Rook e1, bishop d6, and basically this is the moment where I decided to stop the coverage of this game. It's an exchange French, or I mean, you can get something similar from maybe the Petrov or sometimes the Berlin defense. So and the pawn from b2 somehow disappears. So yeah, it's just not a good variation. So in the next game, my opponent already goes for rook e1, which is one of the main lines. I go d5, and here white's idea is to take and follow up with now knight c3. Now it's good because the knight is pinned, and the same is true for the pawn. Queen would be hanging, so queen a5, knight to e4, bishop e6. So this is one of the main lines, and here white normally goes knight g5, as you will see later, but I also had a game for this more rare continuation of bishop d2. So yeah, white's idea is obviously to ask some questions from this queen, which was quite ideally placed on a5. So I went queen to b5, a4. Yeah, this queen b5 is, I believe it's not the most common move, but it's actually working very well, because a4, which looks very tempting, black can actually take on b2. So it looks a little bit risky with behind in the development to grab another pawn, but as you will see, white cannot really exploit this. So rook b1 was played, queen a2, rook b7. Okay, here it looks quite promising for white. Black still needs a couple of moves. This pawn is hanging, the queen is a little bit far away, but here there is a very nice move for black, long castle. Not only protecting the pawn on c7, but also attacking the rook on b7 with the tempo. Of course, this move is somewhat surprising to castle there, but if you look at this position after rook b1, actually this is all in the course, so it went like that. And okay, here white has only one threat to use this g5 square somehow, like with the knight. sometimes with the bishop. That's the only way to pose any problems for black. So black can just make the time to play h6. So this square is not available, knight e5 is not available. Knight on e4 looks nice but cannot go anywhere. So it's really hard to do anything with white because of this d4 pawn, and all the pieces are somehow blocking all the options. Like you cannot do anything with the bishop really. The only plan seems to be this bringing the queen over to a6, which my opponent tried to do with queen e2, but I simply played queen c4. Obviously white is not interested in the queen trade. I mean, that would be just a lost endgame, so he had to go back to d1. This is obviously really bad. I just played bishop e7, bishop f4, rook d5, and knight f d2. I mean, again, it's not even clear what white wants to do. Okay, at least attack the queen was good. And here I made a mistake. I was too greedy. I didn't see any problems with queen a4, but you know, it was just way too unnecessary. I could just go queen a6, and it's not obvious what to do as white. Black is just playing rook d8 next, and have a very comfortable position with the extra pawn. So instead I went queen a4, and this just gives a lot of counterplay for white in this case. I mean, it is still much better for black, I have to say objectively, but it was so unnecessary. And okay, here I had to find queen b4, which I did not. I played queen b5, which is just a huge blunder. My opponent played queen f3, and I won the game later, but he could have played c4, which is a nice move. I basically have to take, and after knight c3, white takes the exchange, and all of a sudden everything got open. So yeah, just be a little bit more modest in this position. Play queen a6, and yeah, it's just a really great position for black. All right, so rook e1, d5, take, knight c3, queen a5, knight e4, bishop e6. So knight g5 is the main move. White wants to take on e6. I castled long, knight takes e6. White takes back the pawn. So this is hundreds of games. Heavy theory here, but a very rare move into h5 in this position. So the main line is something like bishop d6, bishop g5. When the queen stays on a5 for a while, and it cannot do anything against the king, but this queen h5 is really tricky, and yeah, it's not so easy to find the correct way with white in this position. So bishop g5, I mean, this is normally what people play, I mean, to get a tempo on the rook. Rook d5. And now queen e2. This is actually quite nice that most of, or a lot of white players are actually finding this queen e2. It's, you know, it's somehow, at least to me, it looks like that the bishop is hanging, so it has to be protected, like moved away or something, but queen e2 is actually also protecting, because rook g5 would be losing to rook e8. So king d7 is queen e6, and if knight blocks, then queen e6, also with a checkmate. So queen e2, bishop d6, but this queen e2 is actually not a good move. So funny enough, this protects the bishop in a nice way, but after bishop d6, there are already serious problems for white. So basically, like, nothing happened, like one move or two moves out of theory, and already, you know, big problems. I mean, what are the problems? So now the bishop it's possible to take, and also the pawn on h2 is possible to take, because if the knight takes, then the bishop is hanging. So actually the only move I believe in this position for white, which is not like losing, is h4. And then black plays h6. If the bishop is removed, then there is g5. So yeah, white has to be really precise here in order not to get into huge trouble actually. my opponent went bishop h4, which is already pretty much a lost position because I played g5. That is correct. Opponent goes bishop g3. And okay, here I actually messed up, so you can, and I even knew this, that, you know, that's the way how I win this game. But I messed up the move order and it could make all the difference. I played d3. Okay, my opponent took, but here the thing is that there was queen to e4, which I obviously didn't see, so it gets a huge tempo on the rook. And once I go g4 to attack the knight, white does not have to move the knight, but very important that there is this move of c4 attacking the rook, and actually white is surviving here because the rook has to move to some really awkward square, and then in worst case the knight can return to d2. So I believe if even white is slightly better here. Of course, the idea is good, as you can see. If my opponent would have taken on d3, I mean, I shouldn't say like this because my opponent took on d3, and I played g4, and the game is over because okay, now the knight has moved. Knight has to move. My rook is protected, and knight d4 is coming with a fork on the queen and the rook. So wherever the knight goes, knight d4 is winning the game. My opponent decided to sacrifice like this and to give a check on e6, king c7, knight d2, but after rook e8, I mean, there was nothing much to do. My king is simply not weak because after queen f6, I played queen g6, all squares are covered, d3 is falling, and the game is just lost for white. So this is the way to win the game, but I just should start with the move g4. And yeah, here, wherever the knight goes, I mean, the knight has to move because it's hanging with the tempo. And let's say it goes to e1, and then d3. So now white doesn't really have to, you know, I mean, this queen e4 is not a tempo anymore. So of course, if pawn is taken in some way, then this is still winning. And okay, I looked at the move, like if queen e3, actually this line is not so obvious. So this is relatively the best defense for white, but bishop takes on g3, hg, knight d4 is coming. It's a huge tempo on the rook, so that's why the queen actually comes here, so there is this tempo. Now queen goes to f5. C takes on d3. Knight still couldn't take because now there was knight c2. And now queen d7. So basically the goal was to reach the square with the queen, because now rook e8 is a big threat, and also knight f5 is a big threat. So once again, the computer doesn't see any defense here for white, and yeah, I mean, even practically speaking, it's not a big surprise. I mean, it's just white cannot really make moves. I mean, if you would like to bring the rook to c1, then black can even choose which rook to take. So yeah, so this is one of the basic tricks of this variation. Okay, so in the next game, it's already sort of the main line, e5. Now d5, bishop b5, knight d7. Knight e4 is more common, but maybe easier to play for white. So now short castle, bishop e7, and rook e1. This is typical move for players who don't know the theory, and there are many of those players, because this knight e7 is not that common. So the idea is to protect the pawn, and then take on c6, and only then take on d4. But as you will see in later games, it's not needed to protect the pawn on e5. So here black castles, takes, knight takes d4, and key move of the variation, which may look a little bit bad, or not so nice to play, but knight b8 is actually very strong. Protecting the pawn. Black's idea is to push c5 and then knight c6. Later develop the bishop to f5, for example, and have a very, very nice and easy game. And now you can see that this rook e1 was just a waste of time. Rook has not much to do on the e file. It would be probably better on f1 to help the push of this pawn, but it's also debatable. I mean, it's really not so easy to achieve that. So in this position, white probably has to play queen f3 to prepare to meet c5 with knight f5. Okay, black can just take it and have a fine position. Normally white does something else. In this game, my opponent played a3. A clear idea of playing b4, but unfortunately it's not in time. So knight f3, knight c6. Okay, I will just show you the next few moves as, you know, like very easy moves for black. Rook b8, h6, just not to have any knight g5 or bishop g5. Now rook e8. So if white ever wants to sacrifice, then the bishop can always kick the queen out. So no issues there. Rook d1, now d4, and queen d5. So yeah, basically I entered up to this moment with the very strong bishops and, you know, clear play on the queen side. I mean, black is just doing extremely well, and basically this white should somehow do something on the king side, but it's just not there, right? Like, also, you know, if there are like some big dangers, the bishop can just go to f5 and always block here. So, but again, white is very far from creating anything. Okay, so again, this line. Now my opponent took on c6, which is correct. B takes c6 and knight takes d4. So this is the main line, and I mean the reason is that obviously if black goes knight b8 here, which is the main line and still a very respectable line for black, so completely playable, and I'm not sure if it's objectively better than 95 because I really believe that 95 is fine for black, but yeah, anyway, that's the more common move. But repertoire suggests just to take this pawn because I believe it's in 4 different ways possible to attack the knight, and only one is good, and it's not so easy to find that move, I would say. So these moves of rook e1 and queen e2 are very tempting. Both are not good. And then there is also this move of f4, which, let's say, in rapid and blitz games also like very tempting, or like it looks like it's definitely possible that it happens, and this happened in my game. And but this is the easiest to meet. Black just plays c5. So black is not sacrificing the pawn on c6, but rather trades knights. And after queen d4, I castled here, which was just a little bit of a lazy move, I would say. So black should just play c5 right away. Like, just put the pawns here, have the bishop pair, and have a much better position. Let's say queen f2, and now I castle. I mean, I can develop the bishop to e6, then I develop my rook probably to the b file. Then I can bring out my queen somewhere. I mean, black has just a great position here. It's, yeah, I mean, white just has a weakness on e5 and 2 relatively bad minor pieces in this position. So what I did is just, you know, I don't like it for the reason that after knight c3, bishop e6, protecting the pawn, white had this possibility of knight a4, which was not played, but you know, if I give some time to white to organize some blockade, the position is not so easy. I mean, black never has any type of problems, but you know, instead having a big advantage with c5 is obviously preferable. So this f4 is very easily refuted. Another way is to attack this knight with bishop f4, which is actually the correct. This is the correct move. c5. You can see again. This is the idea. White takes cd4, and queen takes d4. So this is obviously not challenging at all. I mean, of course, the bishop can take as well. It's similarly not challenging. I mean, and unfortunately for white, in a way, it's not challenging. That can very easily give the advantage for black. So white has to take on g7, as I will show in the next games. So my opponent went queen d4, and I play c5. So the idea is that forcing the queen away from the diagonal will allow short castle. The queen can go to c3. I mean, in such case, even f6 is possible if I want to. So, and then castle, also good. But okay, my opponent went to d2. I castled. He went knight c3. I pushed d4. So basically, there is no blockade of this pawns, and the bishops are going to be very strong, especially the light square bishop. So now rook e8. Okay, he went back from some x-ray maybe. And here I played, like I would say tempting move in blitz, bishop a6. But actually this position is already very much better for black because of the bishop pair and, like some attacking possibilities. And that there is one very nice one, which is to play h5. It's, a funny way trying to trap the bishop. If h4, bishop f4, then g5, then bishop e5, and then f6 would trap the bishop in this diagonal. So white has to react, h3, h4, and now it's just, some nice space advantage on the king side. And okay, now bishop b7. Obviously, this is the square for the bishop in order to attack. And actually, black has the very big threat of playing bishop to g5. So control the f4 square and then bring the queen to d5. Attack on g2, and in such case, f3 is the only way to protect against mate, but then it gives up e3 and so on. Really horrible position. So yeah, this line with queen takes d4 is not dangerous. Okay, so in the next game I show rook to e1, which is also very common and not good move objectively, I have to say. Here c5 is still good, but I believe f6 is even better in this position. I mean, it requires some knowledge, but not that much. So obviously c5 is the goal in the next move. So white doesn't have any time, has to play f4. And here the point is obviously that that black is not moving the knight, because the knight c6, and c5 is not good anymore because this is just a disaster if the pawn has to take queen h5 and so on. This is not playable. So black's point is to play bishop g4, queen d2, and short castle. So basically it's a piece sacrifice, but again, sacrificing a piece when opponent has 3 pieces on the back rank, very far from joining the game, while these bishops and the rook will be immediately ready to join. It's not kind of a relative sacrifice, so it's not really visible on the board. I mean, obviously now, white has to take the knight. I mean, what else? c5 is coming otherwise. So my opponent took. I took back, so now the rook is open. Very important. So he took on e5. If he would have taken on c6, it's not better. I just give a check with the bishop. King goes to h1, and yeah, after queen h4, I believe it's pretty much game over with moves like rook f2 coming, doubling there. I mean, sometimes bishop f2, bishop g3. I mean, depending on what white does. The game is over in different ways. I mean, white can even take with a check on d5. It does not change anything. It rather gives an extra tempo for attacking the rook. So yeah, it would be just lost. So he took with the rook, and I played bishop d6. So in case now the rook goes back to e1, again it's queen h4, and again, resignation is coming. If h3, then I guess queen g3, queen h2 is easy. And if g3, of course, then the bishop can be sacrificed, and if it's taken, then, for example, this line is completely winning for black. So my opponent rather took on c6, and here I played queen f6. Now the rook is hanging, but much more importantly, obviously, it's mate in one. So he took first on d5, king h8, and played bishop f4. I mean, there is just nothing better here, unfortunately. Even if he would try to protect back rank this way, I just give check, which of course takes back the knight, but bigger problem is a back rank mate, so it was not better. This is just lost. Queen d5, king h8, bishop f4, giving back some material, but okay, here my opponent resigned, I guess, because of rook d8, for example. I take a knight and give checkmate extremely soon. So this was not good again, and so bc 94, 95, 5 here. So bishop g7. This is the correct move, and rook g8. I mean, this is a difficult line, so this requires study and practice and so on to understand, and even then it's not easy, I have to say, but not easy for either side. So with that I am okay. So white again has to find an only move, so it's possible to capture with the queen and the bishop. I mean, bishop d4 is the worst, because then after bishop h3 it's already not possible to protect, so white has to give up the exchange. Queen d4, as was played in this game, is a little bit better, because black has to weaken the position a little bit. But after bishop h3, so I took the exchange, I played queen d7. I mean, white has some compensation for the exchange, also has a pawn, but there is a threat of queen h3, eventually king f7, c6. It's not enough, but it's still a game, so it's not lost for white by any means, but yeah, it's also not enough for a good position. So queen takes d4 is also not good. I did not have yet the main line, I believe. So I decided to bring a game from which was sent in the course forum on Chessable. So this was prepared by not using the course. So I don't want to take any credit for this, but so now a dear student shared this game, which was played actually this weekend, I believe. So against him, knight e5, bishop c4. So it's an over the board game, so it's not blitz or rapid. So bishop g7, rook g8, bishop e5. So this is the way not to lose an exchange, because Now if bishop h3, then it's simply bishop g3, so bishop h3 is just a loss of time. So c5 is the good move here to protect the pawns, and okay, black has still some dangerous play on the g file. Sometimes like rook g6 bringing the king on g8 is a typical idea. But yeah, once again, very unusual position. This is really not easy. And normally people don't know this at all, so I was really surprised that white knew this line. But that's nice. I mean, um, so he played b4. So up to this moment, uh, this was preparation from white, and actually king f8. Okay, maybe this move is from the course. I'm not sure, but I mean this is the recommendation in the course, but I'm not sure if black also found it in preparation or just followed the course here. So b takes on c5, bishop takes on c5. And yeah, I mean, there are different options here for white. And yeah, white immediately made a move which is just gives a big advantage for black. But again, it's just so unusual position that such thing can happen easily. So I would say most obvious move is that what happens if take on d4. This hangs with the check. So takes queen d4, bishop h3. Not winning an exchange, unfortunately, because there is queen c5 check. King g7 is not advisable. So black has to trade on e7, and now rook is coming out. So that's the way to protect the pawn on g3. But after rook c8, I believe in this endgame only black can hope for an advantage, because okay, for now the king is cut completely. If the knight goes to a3, it will be also super passive. I mean, sometimes it can be attacked by rook c3. I mean, objectively the position is equal, but I believe there are not a lot of danger for black in this position. So this is one of the lines which is critical. Bringing the knight out to d2 is another interesting line. Here black can play queen g5, attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to g3, and then bishop g4. And yeah, blocking this with f3 allows d3. Blocking with the knight would allow probably just queen f6, and at some moment trade on f3. Again, not really dangerous for black, but okay, for example, there is a move like queen c1, and it's, I don't know, some rook g6 maybe, like really complicated position. King can walk to h8. So this pawn is missing here, but I mean, it's clear that black's king is not really under any attack. So these are kind of the main moves, and instead white in the game went queen d3, which is not illogical, I would say. It attacking the pawn on h7, preparing some knight d2, going out from bishop g4, stopping bishop h3. So you can make an argument that it's a pretty good move, but it's actually a bad move, unfortunately. So here the game continued with rook g6, which is a good move because it covers h7 pawn and prepares king g8. But it was even better to play queen to g5 to immediately target this bishop and mate. So basically bishop g3 is forced, and just develop with tempo, like just use the time which white wasted with queen d3. And now, okay, I assume the human move is queen b5 and then rook c8. And this position is already evaluated as winning for black with according to the engine. And again, it looks very unusual, so I believe it takes time to understand why. And okay, this knight cannot develop to d2, cannot develop to a3. It means that the rook is stuck. The queen is, I don't know, some interesting journey, trying to attack pieces, but somehow all pieces are covered. Yeah. On the other hand, White's king is pretty lonely, so playing something like h5, h4 is an idea. and it's quite materialistic, but it's also true that the c2 pawn is hanging. So if we add all of those things together, it's, I believe, possible to believe that this position is indeed winning for white, as the computer indicates. All right, so this was the Scotch Gambit video. Thanks a lot for watching. If you have questions or some comments, just feel free to write on YouTube or Chessable, yes, and see you in some other video.